Alright, in this video, we'll look at transatlantic trade, mercantilism, and salutary neglect. When we start looking at triangular trade, with this transatlantic trade, triangular trade, we know our triangle is connecting. It doesn't look like much like a triangle on this map, but the triangle is connecting to 3 continents of Europe, Africa, and the New World. So a very simplified version makes a triangle. And if we look at the different parts of this triangle, we see that from Europe are going to Africa. Things like guns, cloth, iron, beer, alcohol are going to Africa. So they're bringing to Africa things that Africans did not have, and they're exchanging that for primarily slaves. And you see in this pink line going from Africa to the New World is mostly slaves going to the Caribbean, and some of them going up to North America. Also from Africa, there's things going back to Europe that they don't have, like hardwoods and spices, but the big part of the African leg was the slave trade going from Africa to the New World. And that is what we know as the Middle Passage, right? So you can put that up here, the Middle Passage. So we have slaves going to the New World primarily, and then from the New World going back to Europe is the raw materials that they're selling. Things like you see whale oil up here, lumber and furs really from New England, from the southern colonies, rice to tobacco, indigo, things that were cash crops, and then from the Caribbean, sugar, molasses, and wood, all going back to the New World. So that's going back to the Old World. So that's their leg of the triangular trade. And then from the Old World to the New World, manufactured goods and luxuries. So this is triangular trade. So Europe is making primarily, and if we're kind of looking mostly at England in this case and their colonies, England's manufacturing goods that they're selling to their colonies. The colonies are sending back mostly raw materials to England so they can manufacture them in goods, sell some of those raw materials to Africa to bring slaves to the New World to produce more cash crops and raw materials by harvesting them and working on plantations to go back to England. So this is triangular trade. The economic system to govern this is, for England's case, is mercantilism. And the other European nations use it also, but we'll focus on England. Mercantilism, you see the word merchant in there, right? Mercantile. So this is a system to govern this trade. And the idea of mercantilism is, you kind of see up here in this little chart, that a country's power is determined by how much wealth it has, because wealth can be used to build forts, armies, navies, and things like that. And a country's wealth is determined by how much gold or silver they have. Well, before the discovery of the New World, then the idea was that in Europe, in parts of Africa and Asia that they were aware of, there was a finite amount of gold and silver. So for one country to get rich, they had to take gold and silver from another country, but that takes war, that takes costs and things like that. So once they discovered the New World, they realized that there's a whole source of new wealth out there for them to get. So that helps fuel this race to colonize the New World, to get more raw materials, precious metals, or whatever it might be to enrich the mother country. And this idea in the mother country is the idea of balance of trade. You see down here that they need to export more than they import. Think if you export, you're selling stuff for money, and if you're importing things, you're paying to get it. So you want to have more imports. See the scales way down by the imports. More exports than you have imports. So one way to do that is to use these colonies as a source of raw materials, and that's this last part of the diagram here. You see the mother country up here, you see the colonies down here. The colonies will send the raw materials to the mother country, or precious metals, gold, silver, fur, whatever it might be. The mother country will manufacture those and then export them to other countries or their colonies themselves. So this idea of mercantilism is the idea this is a strict government control of the economy. Strict government control of trade, I should say, probably better. So the idea of free trade isn't very popular at the moment. It doesn't really become popular until Adam Smith writes his book in 1776, where he favors free markets and describes supply and demand. At this time, it's more about enriching the mother country. So mercantilism, strict government control of trade. It's to increase a nation's wealth And the way that a nation does that is by using colonies as a source of wealth, or a source of raw materials to create wealth. Raw materials and wealth. And the last thing we can kind of put in this is that colonies, their purpose, colonies' purpose is to enrich the mother country. So in this relationship, it's very one-sided, right? And economically, so much, right? So the mother country is all about enriching the mother country. Colonies exist to enrich the mother country. So what do the colonies get out of this? Well, we know a lot of the people that went to the English colonies went there for economic opportunity, but also went for religious freedom because there weren't jobs in England, there wasn't land available. So they did get something out of it. Plus, they get protection from the mother country if they come into conflict with the Spanish or the French. And if you're trading like tobacco or other goods, you have, in a sense, a guaranteed source of buyer, right? England's going to buy your goods. So we can look at mercantilism then. Benefiting the mother country more than the colonies. So some problems that can come from this is that this creates a monopoly for the mother country. And we can think about why that's a problem if we have the English colonies over here and we put England over here. And then we can put other countries like France and Spain, for example. We could add the Netherlands in there too, but we'll just stick with this. If you are the English colonies and you want to sell tobacco, so we could put up here, tobacco is your cash crop you want to sell. If you want to sell it to England, or if you want to sell it to anybody, you can say, okay, tobacco we're going to sell for, I don't know what prices they would use. Let's say, say $10 per pound. I don't know if that's even realistic, but $10 per pound. And England says, we don't want to give you $10 per pound. Well, you can say, well, France, do you need any tobacco? So you can say, okay, England, they say no. France, do you need any tobacco? And if they say yes, that there's a demand for tobacco, maybe they're willing to pay $10 per pound, which means England, if they want to get tobacco, is going to have to start paying $10 per pound too. However, if England is your only buyer and you're not allowed to sell, you can cross them out. Let's cross out France and Spain in this case. If you're not allowed to sell to France or Spain and you want to sell for $10 per pound, England says, we don't want to give you $10 per pound. We want to give you, let's say they want to give you $7 per pound. And the colonies might say, well, that's unfair. That's not enough. But they have no one else they can sell it to because they've been blocked off from England and Spain. France and Spain. So if they want to sell, they pretty much have to sell to the price that England's asking. Now, England can't ask for rock bottom prices because there'd be a point where the English colonies might say, well, we just won't produce tobacco anymore. It's no longer worth it. But this can drive the price down for the English. If we think about this also in terms of manufactured goods, the other side of that, let's cross out this. Put France and Spain back up there. As far as manufactured goods go, if the English colonies want to buy, let's say wooden tables, right? Tables and chairs. This is what they want to buy. If they can buy it from Spain, France, or England, they can go around, shop, and say, well, who has a better price for tables and chairs? Who has better quality and, who's going to have more affordable products? The same way that you might compare prices when you go shopping at different stores. So if you have competition, England, France, and Spain all selling tables and chairs, you can buy it from the cheaper one, whatever one best suits your needs. However, again, if with this idea of mercantilism, we get rid of France and Spain, and you can only buy from England. England can say, look, if you want tables and chairs, you're going to have to buy them for, $100. And you might say, I don't want to buy them for $100. That's too high of a price. And England would say, well, if you want to have chairs and tables, then you have to buy them from us, and you have to pay $100. So the English colonies would be forced to buy them. Now, again, if England asked for charge $1,000, the English colonies would just not buy them because it would be unaffordable, right? But the idea, though, is a monopoly drives up prices. And the way that they enforced this was with the Navigation Acts, which is a series of acts that started under Oliver Cromwell and continued on to the 1670s under Charles II, where they basically made rules for English trade. Rules for trade in English colonies. One rule would be that trade to and from colonies could only be held or take part on English boats. The other rule they set up was all goods imported from the colonies, or I should say imported to the colonies, had to pass through English ports. If you think about what these two things mean, we could say with this first one, trade to and from colonies could be carried out only on English boats, which meant they had monopoly on the shipping, which means they could charge whatever they wanted for the shipping and jack up the prices. And if you could only buy them from English boats, even if you wanted to buy French goods, let's say the French made something that the English don't like, croissants, you wanted to buy croissants, you still had to buy them from an English boat, which meant an English merchant went to France, bought their croissants, and then marked up the price and sold them to the colonies. So that enriches the mother country. The second one, all goods imported to the English colonies had to pass through English ports, which also meant that all those goods were taxed and taken account by the English government, and so they could raise their money on it, and when they raised the taxes on it, that means the costs went up for the colonists themselves. And then the last thing we'd say that they specified what they called enumerated goods. Some of these goods, whatever they might be, tobacco it starts with, only shipped to England. So with this idea of enumerated goods, England could pick out whatever goods might fetch the most amount of money. Tobacco, later on things like hats and furs and iron. They might say all these goods, these enumerated, or in other words, these listed goods, these specified goods can only be shipped to England, which means that you can't sell them to anybody else. So that would give them a complete monopoly on it. So this system is very much geared towards a mother country and enriching them. And then the last thing we can look at is this idea of salutary neglect. How does this all play out in the colonies? Mercantilism sounds nice for the mother country on paper, but when you're 3,000 miles away across the Atlantic, it's very difficult to enforce it. So salutary neglect is not strictly enforcing laws. So why does this happen? Why have these laws in the book but then not enforce them? Well, England had lots of trouble of their own. The kings and the monarchs of England and in Parliament, they were dealing with internal divisions between themselves. They had the English Civil War that caused trouble. Cromwell comes in afterwards, installs the Navigation Acts, but then they go back to the Stuart family. They bring back the reigning monarch, and there's trouble there about who's going to be the reigning king, who the monarchy is going to pass to, whether it be Catholic or Anglican. They had continued wars with France, so England is really kind of distracted by other things at the time. And then the other thing we think about with this idea of salutary neglect, so we could put up here reasons why, right? Reasons why this happens. Internal political problems in England, wars with France. I think these two things are distractions. It's easy to kind of forget about the colonies or let them do what they're doing as long as it doesn't cause too much trouble because they had other things to deal with. The other thing we could think about with this too, another reason for this was, we might say inept and corrupt government officials in the colonies. Say British officials in the colonies. So I think about inept people that weren't very good at their job or just incapable of carrying it out. They were corrupt. They took bribes, looked the other way. And why would they do this? Well, the American colonists didn't want to settle for this monopolistic control of trade because they could make more money by selling to the Dutch or the Spanish or the French. But these laws said they couldn't do it, so they turned to smuggling. So we have smuggling becomes a big thing during this time. The English colonists become smugglers. So we have smuggling going on. So people ignoring the laws, selling to the selling to the French, the Spanish, or the Dutch anyway. And why doesn't the government crack down on that? Well, because the officials that were sent to the colonies were inept and corrupt. And some of the reason for that is because a lot of these people had connections to the crown, these British officials that might have been sent over there, tax collectors or port authorities. They might have been given this position as a gift from the crown. So why were they in the colonies? Because they were probably not competent enough to do it in Britain, where they kept all the best and the brightest. So these are probably people that were owed favors because of the Restoration. They stayed loyal to their monarchy. They might have been sons of important people in England. They needed a position. So there were people that were, in a sense, kind of so bad that they didn't want them in England, but they owed them a favor. So they sent them off to the American colonies. So they were easy to bribe to look the other way. So this is what we call salutary neglect, the idea that these laws were on the books but not strictly enforced. And this gave the Americans a sense of they could do whatever they wanted to, and the British had no real right to stop it, even though technically by law, this was a law that they accepted in the Navigation Acts as part of mercantilism. But once they got used to not obeying it, they had a really hard time with following it up. You can think about this a little bit like the speed limit. If you were to drive 10 miles over the speed limit for 20 years of your life after you got your license, thinking that that's okay, the police officers aren't going to pull me over and give me a ticket for driving 10 miles over the speed limit, you would be fine with that, or you would get used to that. Even though you knew you were breaking the law, you should not drive 10 miles over the speed limit, but they're going to let you do it, so you kind of get away with it. But if all of a sudden tomorrow the police were to strictly enforce the speed limit, and if you're going 1 mile over the speed limit, they would pull you over and give you a ticket, no warnings, no questions asked, you would feel outraged. You'd be like, wait a second, I was going 51 and a 50. How can you give me a ticket for $75? That's unfair when I've always been able to go 60 and a 50. Well, you were breaking the law all that time, but they weren't enforcing it. That's kind of like salutary neglect. When we get up to the revolution, the American colonists are going to be used to getting away with not doing things, with smuggling and not paying attention to the Navigation Acts. And at the eve of the revolution, they're going to take this away. They're going to start strictly enforce laws, and the American colonists are going to have none of it.